Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillahi wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillahi amma ba'd. So inshallah our today's session is continuation of the same discussion which we are having for last I think almost 4 weeks. And Alhamdulillah, we have touched upon many different aspects of Islamic response to atheism. So inshallah in today's session I just want to focus particularly on one topic, even though I did touch upon this subject in the previous sessions. But inshallah today's session is particularly dedicated to this one subject. And this is the subject of evidence for God's existence. So inshallah without any further delay, let's begin the topic. I have said this in the past as well, and I want to begin with this point, and I want you to be sure that when you have this discussion, the first point is that what do you mean by God? Because some people, they have very weird understanding of this concept of God, and we even don't might agree with this concept of God either. Okay, so the first point and the starting point is that we define our terms. As in this case, the main term is who is God. Okay, so let's start by defining that what we do not mean by God. We do not mean by God that there is a big guy in the sky. This is not what when we say God exists, this is definitely not our understanding of God. And likewise, any imaginative object. What I mean by this, sometimes for example somebody might say that unicorns, any fairies, any big monsters, something like that, and by the way people do say this kind of things. So we are not proposing any imaginative object or entity with mysterious powers. This is not what we mean by God. And if this is someone's understanding of God, so let's be very clear. We do not believe in any such God of human imagination, and there is no evidence that such God exists. So this is the first point that has to be clear. Okay, if we do not mean by God these things, then what do we mean by God? So, number one, when we say that God exists, we say that there is a necessary foundation of this entire existence which we call universe. And in order for this universe to exist, this necessary foundation must exist. We are not just proposing a possibility of a God. No, we are saying that this God, which inshallah we define in a minute, in this definition, with this description, God must exist. If there is no God, there is no universe. This is our position. Okay, so and this necessary foundation, number one, it is eternal. Eternal means it never came into existence. Okay, and likewise, secondly, it is one, and it is incomparable and unimaginable. What we mean here by saying incomparable and unimaginable, that whatever a human mind thinks or imagines, that is definitely what we mean by God. Okay, so our God is incomparable and unimaginable. Please, someone's mic is not muted. Please mute your mic. And it is absolutely independent or self-contained. It does not depend on anything. This is what we mean by God. And likewise, and this point now is very important. The God we are proposing has ultimate will, knowledge and power. So if when we add this thing in the description, we have eliminated any such possibility of there being like a like for example some sort of mechanistic kind of cause or something, laws of nature and this and that. No, we are proposing a God who has will, knowledge and power, and these things are with the God in the ultimate sense. And last but not the least, this God is the ultimate explanation of all that exists. all of this description, if you really reflect on this description, I am actually simply giving Suratul Ikhlas. And we know that this is our standard concept of God. And what is it? A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Qul huwallahu ahad. Number one, Allah is one and only, uniquely one. Okay, it's not just wahid, it is ahad. Ahad means one and only. Allahu as-samad. Allah is self-sufficient, self-contained. He is eternal. Okay. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. Neither he gives birth and nor he was given birth. In other words, he has no beginning. He never started to exist. He is eternal. Okay. Walam yakullahu kufuwan ahad. And there's absolutely nothing comparable to him. In other words, he is incomparable and unimaginable. So as we know that this is our understanding of God, and this clause that he has ultimate will, knowledge and power, this runs in the whole Quran. Allah says again and again that huwa bikulli shay'in alim, huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. So this is the understanding of God. This is the description of God which we believe in and which we are proposing and which we believe exist with undeniable evidence. Clear? Now inshallah I will share with you same evidence actually which I have already introduced in my past session, but inshallah in today's session I'm going to expand upon that same evidence. Okay, because my understanding is that this is the most important and I would say that frequently coming evidence in the Quran on the existence of our Creator. I have requested earlier, I want to request again, please keep your mics muted. It really disturbs me and others as well. Jazakumullahu khair. So, obviously, when the subject is existence of God, second term after describing God, second term that has to be defined. What do you mean by existence? Because this is very important, because if we are discussing the subject of God's existence, so let's understand the concept of existence as well. So what we are proposing, and it is not something which they call special pleading. We are not just, for example, introducing something just out of thin air just to prove something. No, if something exists, there are only two possibilities. And please understand this concept very clearly. If something exists, there are only two possibilities. That this existence is contingent. I know this contingent is a philosophical term, but let's inshallah understand this in our day-to-day language. What we mean by contingent is, in simple terms, dependent. So whatever exists, it will be either dependent or independent. Okay, and secondly, whatever exists, it either can explain its existence or it requires explanation outside of it. So when we say contingent, we mean that something that needs to be explained. Let me give you a simple example. For example, a door. A door can be shut, a door can be open. There are two possibilities. Okay, now if a door is shut or if a door is open, it has to be explained. Why? Because it could be in one of these two situations, either close or shut. So if you see that door is shut, why? Because it doesn't have to be shut. You see, this is what I mean by something needs to be explained through external. One more example, just to clarify this point. If you hear a knock on your door, or you hear a doorbell, okay, now obviously it's not that doorbell has to be ringing or door has to be knocking. No, it doesn't have to be like that. So if there is a knock on the door or if there is a doorbell ringing, there has to be some explanation. either doorbell has some fault or someone is ringing the doorbell. Either someone is knocking or there may be some wind. No problem. There may be wind simply. No problem at all. But there has to be something. Okay? If door is knocking or bell is ringing, you need to explain it. This is what I mean by external explanation, because knocking of the door or ringing of the bell cannot explain itself. It needs to be explained by some other cause. So this is what I mean by this one, external explanation. Okay? Why? Because it doesn't have to exist. For example, door doesn't have to be knocking. Okay, it's not that doors are always knocked. No. Okay, and likewise, it could have existed in some other way. I said before, it could have been knock on the door or no knock on the door, or door could be shut or door could be open. So this is what I mean by contingent. So in a nutshell, when we say that something is existing and it is contingent, it means that that thing is dependent. That thing needs to be explained, and it doesn't have to be the way it is, or it doesn't have to be existing at all. In opposite to that is something what we call necessary existence. Absolutely opposite to contingent, which means necessary means it absolutely independent and it does not have to be explained. Now, one example. If a triangle has 3 sides, do I need to explain that why it has 3 sides? Not at all. Why? Because a triangle, by definition, by necessity, has to have 3 sides. But if I say a red triangle, now this extra attribute of redness, I need to explain this. So when I say no external explanation, it means that that thing can explain itself. In other words, example of a triangle with 3 sides. A triangle having 3 sides does not need to be explained. It is a self-explained fact. Clear? So, and it could not have existed in some other way. In other words, if it does not have 3 sides, it cannot be triangle. So this is by necessity. Okay? So necessary existence is an existence which is absolutely independent and which does not need any explanation outside of it. Clear? So now I want you to think about this, and you can ask the other person you talk to, you can ask him to think about this. If something exists, can it fall in any other third category? Just think about this. Impossible. Because if something truly exists, there are only 2 possibilities. It will be either contingent or dependent, or it will be necessary or independent. Clear? Now this was very important explanation on the concept of existence. Let's move on. Now inshallah, the same argument which I have introduced in the previous session, inshallah today I will go in details on this different aspect of this one. So this is our argument. Everything in universe is contingent. Now I don't need to explain again what I mean by contingent. You can simply say that everything in the universe is dependent, or you can say that everything in the universe has to be explained the way it is. Clear? And by the way, let's talk about this first premise before I move to second point. This premise A. No scientist denies this fact that universe is contingent, which means that objects in the universe needs to be explained. And this is the whole reason we have this scientific enterprise. Why? Because science understands this, or scientists understand this, that this universe needs to be explained. It doesn't have to be the way it is. And that's the whole reason that they are embarking on this journey of explaining our universe. So universe with all its object is contingent. This is something which is not disputed between a theist and an atheist. Why? Because atheists also understand that scientists also gives explanation. And if you need to explain something, I have said before, it means that that thing is contingent. Okay? Premise B. So if every object in the universe is contingent, then universe as a whole is contingent. Now this premise B is often challenged by the atheist. Inshallah, in few minutes I'm going to go in detail with the examples that this premise B, if premise A is accepted, then premise B cannot be denied. Inshallah, I'll explain to you in a few minutes. So premise A is everything in the universe is contingent. Premise B, so universe as a whole is contingent. And this premise C is our key premise. And any set or series of contingent objects, which universe is, must require a necessary foundation in order for it to exist. In simple terms, a series of dependent objects cannot exist without a necessary foundation. Clear? Inshallah, I'll explain this point in a lot more details in few minutes. And therefore, universe must require a necessary foundation for its existence. So every single thing is basically following from the previous point, which means that if A is true, then B is true. And if B is true, then C is true. And if A, B, C are true, then D is necessarily true. Now the only way, please listen this point carefully, the only way somebody can refute this argument is if they can challenge our premise A, B or C. If any of those premises can be challenged and can be provided sufficient evidence to be refuted, obviously then this argument is false. But if premise A, B and C cannot be refuted, then the conclusion necessarily follows. So understand, this is how this argument is built. Now inshallah, let's understand this primarily. Like I said before, I will mainly focus on premise C, that why I'm saying this, that a series of or a chain of dependent objects cannot exist without a necessary foundation, because this is the key part of this premise of the whole argument. Okay, so inshallah I will go on more detail on C, but definitely I will address B as well. Okay, let's inshallah see. I have already shown you this same image in the past as well, but like I said, inshallah today is the details of this same concept. So as you can see that in this example we have given a parable, an analogy, okay, that just imagine that you see that there's a chain of people leaning one on other. Okay, as you can see in this image that this first guy is leaning on this second guy, this second guy is leaning on the third guy, and so on and so forth. So this is a series of dependent objects. Now I want you to think about this scenario. I have proposed here, which is our argument, that because this is a series of dependent objects, so it must need a necessary foundation, which I have proposed here, something like that. I'm not saying what this thing is, okay, just idea. At this stage only the idea that this series of dependent objects must need this foundation. And you can imagine, just think in your mind, if you remove this foundation, can any one of them survive? Think about the scenario. Okay, apparently you can see that okay, this first guy is not falling on the ground because of the second guy. Yes, that is true. But this whole series as a whole, the series as a whole cannot sustain if this foundation is not here. Clear? Let me give you one more example, inshallah, before I start driving the points from these examples. Look at this one. We have discussed this before. It is just you can like a series of dominoes knocking upon each other. Now point number one, it must require an object that knocks off the first domino. You see, I have made this hand here, but I am only trying to explain this point, that if this object, by the way, this object does not have to be a human being, it may be simply wind, I don't mind that. It may be wind. It may be just a rock, somebody throw a rock. No problem at all. But what I'm saying is that there has to be something here. There has to be something here in the start of this chain which start the process of knocking the first domino. I mean, I want you to imagine, is it possible that if there was nothing in the start of this series and dominoes just start falling on each other? Once again, understand this point. I am saying it may be wind, no problem at all. But in that case, wind is that cause, or wind is that foundation which is in the start of this series which knocks off the first domino. Okay, and secondly, very important point, it must be this object, this necessary object, which in this case is a hand, it must be outside of the series. I mean, it cannot be part of this series. Why? Because if this is part of the series, it means it is simply another domino. It's simply another domino in the series. So whatever this thing is, that thing has to be outside of the series. Clear? So once again, same concept, that a series of dependent objects, in this example, for example, this domino 1 knocking the second domino, so the knocking of second domino is dependent on the first domino. Then likewise, knocking of the third domino is dependent on second, and so on and so forth. So this knocking of dominoes is a series of dependency. Understand the point very clearly. This falling dominoes is a series of dependency. And now I want you to imagine, can this series of dependency exist without there being some cause here? It may be a hand, it may be wind, or whatever. This is what we are saying, that a series of dependent objects must require something outside of it which is explaining the whole series. Clear? And that is what we are inshallah arguing here. Let's move on. Now, like I said in the past as well, that obviously we are not interested just in a necessary foundation. Rather, through these arguments, we want to establish the existence of God with the description which we believe. And I already gave that in the start. Okay, Suratul Ikhlas is a very good starting point. Okay, now I said that the first attribute of whatever, and please listen this point carefully, up till this stage, we have not established existence of God. We are not saying that. No, not at all. But what we are saying is that we have established existence of a necessary foundation. That's it. So be very clear, because sometimes people they try to raise objection that okay, if there's a necessary foundation, why is that foundation God? We are not saying that. Once you agree with us, because this agreement is very important whenever you have discussion on this subject, so please move step by step. So this first agreement is very important, that the other party agrees with us that yes, there has to be a necessary foundation. Okay, now let's analyze the essential attributes of that necessary foundation. Okay, number 1, it must be eternal, or in other words, always in existence. Why I'm saying this? These are few points. For any single dependent objects to exist, there must already be a necessary existence. Let's go back to our example again to clarify this point. Just imagine that we don't have this complete series. We only have this one guy. So even if you have this one dependent guy, one leaning guy, even this one leaning guy needs a necessary foundation. So this necessary foundation has to be there. It has to be there. You cannot even begin the process of dependent objects without there being a independent, self-sufficient, self-contained foundation. Okay, so this is what I mean by this point, that for any single dependent object to exist, there must already be a necessary foundation, and something that is brought into existence cannot be a necessary foundation, which means in simple terms that if someone needs to brought this thing into existence, this necessary foundation, then this foundation would not be necessary, because we have defined our terms in the start that necessary foundation, what we mean is absolutely independent thing or object. Okay, and if something needs to be created or needs to be brought into existence, that cannot be independent or necessary or self-contained. Okay, so this is what I mean by this point, that something that is brought into existence, it cannot be necessary foundation. Okay, and so the conclusion is necessary existence or necessary foundation must be there from eternity. Why? Because if that foundation was not there, you cannot have any single dependent object. Because for any single dependent object to exist, there has to be this necessary foundation, and which you can understand from this example as well. Even if there's no series of dominoes, there's only one domino here, even the first domino to fall, you have to have this foundation. Clear? So this is how we understand the concept of being eternal. So that necessary, so far we have derived one attribute of this necessary foundation, and this is the attribute of being eternal. Okay, let's keep moving. Necessary foundation cannot be within this series. I have said this earlier, and let me repeat again from the same example. Okay, we cannot call necessary foundation to any of these objects. Clear? So necessary foundation by necessity exists outside of the series, as in this case this pillar, as in this case this hand. Clear? So necessary foundation must be existing outside of the series. Okay, and this universe as a whole is a series of dependent or needy objects. Okay, inshallah, if you have any question on this point, you can ask me in the Q&A session. Okay, so this is what I said here, and let me explain it further. Okay, let me give you the analogy of an artist and a painting. Now please understand this point. If you see a portrait of a beautiful painting, for example like this one, the artist of the painting or the artist of this work would be inside the painting. Just think about this. I know it may sound very simplistic one, but wallahi, this is exactly when a person is thinking that God must be within the universe. It is as though as somebody is saying that the artist has to be within the painting. We all know this simple example, that the artist, number one, exists before the painting. Clear? And number two, artist cannot be found in the painting. However, read this one. You can know a lot about the artist by reflecting on his painting. In the same way, you can know a lot about your creator, about that self-contained foundation by reflecting on this painting. This universe is like a big painting, because sometimes when things become bigger in volume and size, we feel like they are incomprehensible. But if we bring them in a small example, we can understand the concept. So as an artist must exist before the painting, number one, and number two, artists would not become the painting. Artists would make the painting. Clear? And number three, artist is not in the painting. Clear? So this is very important. Okay? Inshallah, if you have questions, you can ask me in the Q&A if this point is not clear. Okay, third attribute, it must be non-material and outside of time and space. Let me go back to this analogy first. Again, the same analogy. You know, all of these objects all of these objects, if necessary foundation is existing outside of that, and it must exist outside of that, then it means that in the case of our universe, the necessary foundation of the universe, if it is outside of this series, it means that it is immaterial. Why? You know why? Because everything in the series mean this universe as a series of dependent objects, or the series I showed you before. Okay, so anything within this series of dependent objects is material, and we have already established in this point number 2, that necessary foundation is outside of the series, which means that necessary foundation is non-material and outside of time and space, because this whole series is our time and space. And if necessary foundation exists outside of it, it means we are saying that necessary foundation is non-material and outside of time and space. Why? For simple reason. If necessary foundation is material and within the time and space, it is as though it is just another domino. Clear? So if this point is clear, inshallah, it will be very helpful for our next, inshallah, upcoming points. Now, people say that then why is he hiding? Why is God hiding? Okay, and by the way, I'm using this word God, but I know at this stage I have not established the concept of God. Rather, with the gradual process, we are establishing the properties or the essential properties of this necessary foundation. Okay, and we see at the end that can we call these properties a God or not. Okay, now people say that I will believe it God when I see. Now, Quran actually, in between the lines, Quran gives this argument that existence and survival of contingent objects in and of itself is the proof that there has to be necessary foundation. Let me go back to same example. If these guys are not falling on the ground, please understand this. Just imagine that if this guy is leaning one on the other, if this chain goes, so long that you cannot see the end of this chain. Please understand this example carefully. Let's suppose this same example of guys leaning one on the other. This chain goes so far that you cannot see the end of it. So what? Even if you cannot see the end, you know as a thinking person that in the start of this, wherever it starts, there has to be something on which first guy is leaning. Understand this point? So this point is very important, that just reflect on this dependent objects. How can you explain this series of dependent objects without there being an independent, self-sufficient foundation? In the same way as these guys, even if you do not see this pillar, okay, you can still infer, you can drive with your intellect that there has to be something which is holding the whole series together. So this argument or this objection that why can't we see God is actually irrational. Because once you agree with this, and once again, the point is we are going step by step. We are getting agreement on one point and then we move on. Because the other person is agreeing on this point that this universe must need a necessary foundation, then it does not make any sense to say I want to see that. Why? Because as in this example, you don't need to see this one, and likewise in this example, you don't need to see this object. It may be a hand, it may be wind, you don't have to see it. You can infer that if one object is falling on the other, it means that something has started the process and that something has to be in existence. Okay, so this is very important. And by the way, inshallah, from the verses of the Quran, if you ask me this question, wallahi brothers and sisters, I can give you evidence from the Quran that this is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is not showing Himself to us. And in case if you did not get this point, please ask me in the Q&A session. So far this was number 1, eternal. Number 2, outside of the series. Number 3, non-material, outside of time and space. Number 4, unseen. This foundation has to be in this dunya. If it is outside of the series, it has to be unseen. If you can see it, it will be just another domino. Clear? Let's inshallah. And as you can see in this example, I just tried to make some. My son actually made compiled this funny image that if you remove that foundation, this is what will happen. In other words, if that necessary foundation of the universe is not there, universe first of all cannot even come into existence and cannot survive into existence. Okay, let's inshallah move on. At this point, very important common objection. I am not just, for example, thinking. No, when I have spoken to people, they have raised this objection. Okay, and this is the objection. They say that yes, there is a chain of dependency running through this universe, but universe as a whole is self-contained. Remember, let me show you again. We have these 4 premises. So they agree with premise 1, and this time they are challenging the premise B, which means that yes, universe is consisting of dependent objects, but universe as a whole is self-contained. Okay, let's inshallah understand that how to answer this objection. So point number 1, universe is merely a term used to refer to the sum of dependent objects in existence. So basically, universe is not something which you can show. Universe is a collective name, is a collective title of all the dependent objects. Okay, for example, if one is asked to point to universe, for example, if you ask someone point to the universe, what this person would do? Necessarily this person would point to the objects of the universe. Okay, and we have already established that objects are dependent, and once you agree that objects are in the series are dependent, it does not make any sense to say that the series as a whole is independent. Again, understand it from this same analogy. If you are admitting that these guys are dependent on each other, on what basis you are saying that the chain of the guys as a whole is independent? Does it make any sense? Clear? Likewise, once you agree that each of the domino depends on the domino before it, then on what basis you are saying that we do not need this external force, rather dominoes are self-contained as a series? No, it does not make any sense. So the key point, please listen, the key point here is that universe there's no such thing as universe. Okay, universe is just a title used for these dependent objects. So when the person is saying that universe as a whole is independent, what is actually saying? Because this statement does not make any sense. Clear? So this is how you can. And by the way, this objection is not only raised by the common people, it is raised, and if you watch the debates, you will be surprised that this objection is coming from the atheist academics as well, and which is very surprising to me, by the way. Subhanallah, then how can you come to this conclusion? And inshallah, by the way, I have the answer. Quran gives us the answer that how come that people want to reject God at any cost. Even if they have to divorce their intellect, they are willing to do that. Inshallah, I'll explain to you why. So clear? Let me give you another example to further establish this point, that if universe, in terms of the parts of universe being dependent, then universe as a whole must be dependent. Let's take this example. Analogy of 10 people in need of $10. Just imagine that there's a series or there's a circle of 10 people. You can take any number, okay? Let's suppose there are 10 people. And the first guy, he needs $10. He asks the second guy for $10. And second guy does not have that. He asks the third guy does not have that. Now I want you to please understand and imagine this scenario. If none of the person in the series independently has $10, can this first guy ever have $10? Just think about this. Impossible. Impossible. So these guys in these 10 guys in the series, they are dependent. Okay, and if there is nothing which has independently produced or possess $10, this series can never have $10. Okay, so this is what I mean by saying that if objects of the universe are dependent and needy, and they are dependent and needy, because if you ask someone and you think your own self, we cannot point to any single object in the entire universe which we can say that is independent. Think about this. And if this is the case, this is the situation, then universe as a whole has to be dependent. So basically I am addressing this objection that universe as a whole may be self-contained. Clear? Let's inshallah move on. So next point, it has to be one. This necessary foundation of the universe has to be one by necessity. You know why? Let's look at this one. If one independent being or independent foundation, by the way, in this case I simply mean by being existence. Being mean existence. I'm not saying that it is a person yet, okay? We have not established any person yet, okay? Or any, basically any God with a will. We have not done that, okay? In simple terms, from the being I simply mean existence, okay? So if one independent being can do the job, then why are you proposing a second? Explain for us. Because if you, obviously we are saying that it has to be one. Clear? By necessity. And the other person says that why? Why not two? Why not three? Our question is, you explain to us that why you need a second. Okay? So if one independent being can do the job, then why are you proposing a second? And on the contrary, if this one alone cannot do the job, then this one is not necessary. Simple. So because we are proposing a self-contained, let me just go back to the same example, because sometimes examples make point more clearer. If someone says that this foundation should be more than one, now I ask you to think about this. If someone is proposing more than one foundation, who bears the burden of proof? The person who is proposing more than one. He needs to explain that why two. Clear? Because if one foundation can do the job and you're still proposing a second, you need to explain why. And secondly, any number, very important point, any number other than one needs or begs a question. There's a mistake here. So any number other than one needs or begs a question. I.e., if one says 2, my question would be, why 2? Why not 3? And if somebody says 3, my question would be, why 3? Why not 4? Did you see the point? So when you go beyond one, please listen this point carefully. When you go beyond one, you need to explain it. The one who is proposing more than one, he needs to explain, not us. Clear? Because he is proposing something that has to be explained. And this is not, for example, we are just having a special pleading. No. There's something called Occam's razor. There's a principle in rhetoric and in philosophy, is called Occam's razor. What is that? Entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity. If you are multiplying the entities, you have to have a reason or necessity. So our question is that why you want to propose more than one? Because understand this point, the other person is agreeing with us that yes, there has to be a necessary foundation. Okay. Now if he raised the question that it has to be more than one, then we have to ask the question that why more than one? Okay. And anything beyond one cannot be explained. It has to be one. And by the way, this can be answered in some other way as well. Okay. As Allah says in the Quran that if there were more than one ilah in this universe, there would be chaos. Inshallah, I've explained this point further maybe in future, but for now this is sufficient, that anything that is proposed beyond one has to be explained. And now comes the most important and last point. Inshallah, after this point it will be your questions. And please, I want you to understand this sixth point very clearly, because when you see the discussions between the theist, by the way, theist means the one who believes in God, and atheist means the one who rejects the existence of God. Okay, so when you watch the discussion and debate between the theist and the atheist, this is where you can say the deadlock comes. Okay, and the deadlock comes in this point. They say that, okay, if there has to be a necessary foundation, it has to be eternal, it has to be outside of the series, it has to be self-contained, it has to be one, but it may be something lifeless, some sort of mechanistic kind of thing, some sort of thing which is lifeless. Clear? Now inshallah, in the sixth point we are going to establish that, this necessary foundation must have will and choice. And if an entity has will and choice, then it cannot be something lifeless. Clear? Let's inshallah see, because will and choice necessarily implies consciousness, number one, and number two, life. Okay, for example, if you ask someone or you think yourself that if you see, let's suppose, a stone, okay, and that stone, you see that one day there was a stone in the street, would it be possible to even imagine that next day you see that stone is just moving and rotating around in the atmosphere? Impossible. You know why? Because it has no will. Clear? So inshallah, I'll explain this point further. So why we are saying that this necessary foundation must have will? Point number one, and that is the most important point. How to explain eternal cause, this eternal necessary foundation, but temporal effect. Eternal mean no beginning, and temporal mean beginning in time. In this case, our necessary foundation is the eternal object, okay, and this universe is the temporal effect. Clear? Now here's the argument. If X is the cause of Y, and in this example we are just saying that X is the necessary foundation and Y is the universe. So if X is the cause of Y, how to explain that X exists and Y doesn't? Which mean, as science has pretty much agreed now that this universe has a beginning, and as you know, some of you know that they say that it came into existence 13.7 billion years ago. You don't have to agree with the number, okay? And by the way, inshallah, if you like, I can give you the reasons from the scientific point of view that why science has concluded that this universe in which we are living, it has a starting point. It came into existence, it was not in existence all the time. It means it's not eternal. Now, what we are saying is that our cause is eternal, and cause means necessary foundation, and effect is temporal. Effect means the universe. How is it possible? Let me give you the example because it's a bit complicated point, okay? For example, fire. Fire is the cause and heat is the effect. Clear? Is it possible that there is fire and there is a time gap? Understand the point? We have fire and then there's a time gap until the heat comes. If fire is there, heat necessarily follows from it. In other words, if something is automatically coming from something, then they have to exist simultaneously, as in the example of fire and heat. And if that is not the case, then it means that cause has will and choice. Clear? The cause has chosen. For example, hypothetically speaking, if we are saying that fire is there and there is no heat, and then after some time the heat begin, it means that this cause has choice, it has will. Otherwise, how would you explain this? And inshallah, if this first point is not clear, you can ask me in the Q&A. So in a nutshell, if there is cause and cause is just mechanistic cause, then effect will be immediately after that. But if cause and then delay in the effect, it shows that cause has will and choice. Clear? Now, we said that this necessary foundation, which we agreed already, it acts as a sorting agent for the contingent objects, i.e. makes choices. Very important point. Think about this. Every object in this universe, either human beings or animals or plants or whatever, every object has limited physical properties. For example, their color, their height, their weight. This is what I mean by limited physical properties. Now the point is, if every object has limited properties, there are three options. Option number one, that the object itself has chosen those properties. Think about this, it is impossible, because when object was not in existence, how object can choose the properties? Clear? Second possibility is that yes, object did not choose, but it is just, for example, you can say that by necessity. So option number one is that object itself has chosen the properties, which is impossible. Second option is that the properties of each object are there by necessity. You know why? It is not true. Example. You know, grass is green. Okay? Currently in our universe, the grass we have is green. But the question is, what is there to conclude that by necessity grass has to be green? Why not pink? Why not yellow? Why not some other color? So we cannot say that the properties of every object are by necessity. No, there's no such thing by necessity. Okay? So it doesn't have to be, in simple terms, the way every object is, it doesn't have to be the way it is. It could have been in some different way. Clear? So the question is, if every object in the universe is having this limited physical properties, how would you explain? Either that object itself has chosen the properties, impossible, or those properties are by necessity, impossible. The other option is that the cause, the necessary foundation, is the sorting agent for the properties of these objects. Clear? Now, if it is the sorting agent, which means it is making choices, clear, and choice shows will and consciousness, because a lifeless thing has no will, no choice, no consciousness. Inshallah, if you have question, I can take on this point in the Q&A session. Let's take some more example. By the way, it's a body of evidence. Okay, we are building a case with the body of evidence together, that why this necessary foundation must have will, because will is the main point. Okay, now next point I said is that how to explain diversity in the effect if it is just a mechanistic cause. If necessary foundation is just some sort of mechanistic thing, how would you explain diversity? For example, cause and in the effect in the universe, you have different things. Okay, you have different things. You have animals, you have human beings, you have trees, you have other objects. Okay, so this diversity, because if, understand the point, if cause or necessary foundation is just some sort of mechanistic thing, then all its effects should be same. And we can clearly see that the effect of this cause are diverse. So this diversity explains will and choice. Okay, and likewise a cause is not a lifeless cause. A lifeless cause can never do something and opposite of it. For example, fire is a lifeless cause, okay? Fire always gives heat. Fire can never freeze. Understand this point very clearly, okay? So a mechanistic kind of cause can never have something and opposite of it. So if the foundation, if necessary foundation is just a mechanistic kind of thing, then how can it have something and opposite of it? For example, in this effect, we have cold, we have heat, we have pain, we have pleasure. So how would you explain that? Okay, so this cause or this necessary foundation cannot be a mechanistic kind of thing. Otherwise, you cannot explain, as fire can only do one thing, not the opposite of it. And in this case, fire is a mechanistic cause. Okay, one last point, inshallah. It should be sufficient, inshallah. So this point is that not having will is a limitation. And how would you explain it? If you are saying that this necessary foundation has no will, it means that you are putting a limitation, a limit on this foundation. On what basis? You have to explain, because we all know that objects in the universe do have will. We have will, okay? And if you are proposing that this necessary foundation has no will, the question is, on what basis you are making this claim? Because we are saying that by necessity, this necessary foundation must possess all what this universe possesses, okay? But in the ultimate sense, we have will. Okay, the effect has will, effect has consciousness, effect is making choices. On what basis you can say that necessary foundation of the effect has no will and it cannot make any choice? And if it does have will and choice, then it outrules the possibility that this necessary foundation is a mechanistic kind of thing. Let's take a pause and let's summarize the whole discussion. So this universe must have a necessary foundation, otherwise it cannot exist. Then we start analyzing the essential attributes of this foundation, and we concluded with these attributes. Number 1, eternal. Number 2, non-material and outside of time and space. And number 3, it has to be one. And number 4, it has to have a will. And when we say will, it implies consciousness as well, because without consciousness there is no will. And if somebody agrees with this description, this is exactly what we are proposing as God. That is the point here, okay? Description, this description is the description of God. You are not just willing, you are agreeing with the description, and you are disagreeing with the title. Okay, you may want to call it something else. You may want to call it, for example, dark matter. Okay, or you may want to call it, for example, some other thing. But why is it that after having the description, and now the last inshallah point before I end my presentation is, with our reflection on this universe, we have concluded a description of necessary foundation. And then when we compare the description with revelation, okay, we see that whatever revelation says is completely in alignment with what our intellect says. Clear? So when we say we believe in God on the basis of Quran, it is not something blind faith. Because what Quran describes as God in Surah Al-Ikhlas, all of that can be concluded rationally from reflecting on this universe as well. And this is exactly what our case is. And inshallah, I'm not saying that I have concluded the whole matter. There are still some areas which I have not been able to touch, but obviously we cannot go more than 1 hour. So inshallah, I end here.